Good evening, dear Medyascope viewers. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. This evening, our guest will be political scientist and academic, Professor Tanju Tosun. He'll be joining us to speak about the recent developments in Turkey's domestic politics. But first, let's take a look at some of the developments of the week. As of November 25th, the Ministry of Health has started to include asymptomatic cases in its daily count. According to these numbers, Turkey has registered 29,132 new coronavirus infections as of November 26th. The total number of positive patients has reached 474,606, while the official death toll from the coronavirus is 13,014.
Following a meeting of the Coronavirus Scientific Advisory Board, Health Minister Fahrettin Koca said the number of asymptomatic cases will also be shared from November 25 onwards at the request of our people. According to the numbers revealed, Turkey has become the first in Europe and the third in the world after the US and India in terms of highest new daily positive cases. Amid growing suspicion regarding the accuracy of the official figures, Koca had admitted in late September that the ministry was excluding asymptomatic cases from its daily count. Following the meeting, Koca said that if people do not follow the measures resolutely, heavy restrictions would be inevitable in the upcoming days. Last week, the government announced tighter restrictions in the fight against the virus, including the introduction of weekend partial curfews and limitations on the opening hours of restaurants, cafes, and shopping malls.
Bülent, one of the leading associates of President Erdoğan, gave his resignation on November 24th. As the former Speaker of the National Assembly and a founding member of the ruling AKP, Arınç left his position on the High Advisory Council. Arınç's resignation came following his remarks over Turkey's judicial reforms that created major controversy.
Bülent Arınç's resignation came after Erdoğan's strong reaction to Arınç's statement on a TV broadcast regarding legal reforms that do not align with AKP's objectives. In the TV broadcast, Arınç called for the release of the former co-chair of the HDP, Selahattin Demirtaş, and the prominent philanthropist Osman Kavala. Both Demirtaş and Kavala have been imprisoned on terrorism charges. Arınç stated that the charges against these two political prisoners are outright baseless. Arınç's remarks in support of the release of Demirtaş and Kavala stirred controversy in Turkish politics. Erdoğan's response to the remarks came on November 22nd during a televised address. Without mentioning Arınç's name, Erdoğan said that personal statements cannot be seen as equal to the party's stance and that he cannot connect himself with those who walk hand in hand with terrorism. We cannot stand next to people like Kavala. We cannot stand next to the killers of our Kurdish brothers, Erdoğan stated. As a result of Erdoğan's response, Bülent Arınç gave his resignation on November 24. In his statement, Arınç underlined that he had consulted Erdoğan before announcing the resignation. Adding that he stood behind his previous statements, he explained his concerns and his decision to be related to a derailing from the reform process. I will not stop listening to the voice of my conscience, even though I had paid a price for it. I will continue to work for the interest of the country by President Erdoğan, wrote Arınç on his official statement. Arınç's resignation came right after the resignation of the Minister of Finance, Berat Albayrak, who is also Erdoğan's son-in-law. These consecutive resignations by two government officials that are known to be the most prominent members of the party suggested that a crackdown in the AKP is emerging. In accordance with the resignations of Albayrak and Arınç, party's co-founder and former congressman Mehmet İhsan Arslan has been referred to the party's disciplinary committee. Arslan is facing disciplinary action after giving a detailed interview to BBC where he criticized Erdoğan's handling of the peace process between PKK and the government. Arslan also published a book named What is Left in My Head and What I Left Behind, where he wrote that Turkey owes the Kurds a debt of 100 years. Regarding this statement, Arslan shared his thoughts to Medyascope viewers with the following words. When this country was first founded, it was founded without the discriminating notion that separates Kurds and Turks. They fought together, they sacrificed together, and they paid for each other's mistakes. It is seen today that what has been promised then is not only broken, but the contrary is being applied. That is when the fight picks up. Along with Arslan's comments on the government's stance towards the Kurdish issue, his son, Ali Ihsan Arslan, was called out in a New York Times article for lobbying for the Turkish government in Washington, D.C. According to the New York Times, Ali signed a deal with a lobbying firm to get Erdoğan closer to the new president-elect, Joe Biden. The newspaper published an official document that was signed in October between Arslan and the lobbying firm Avenue Strategies. Describing the activities to be engaged between the signatories, the document stated the following: registrants may provide assistance by introducing Mr. Arslan to policymakers and thinkers in Washington, D.C. for the purpose of developing better relations.
This evening, our guest is political scientist and academic, Professor Tanju Tosun.
Good evening, Professor Tosun. Thank you so much for having joined us this evening.
It's my pleasure. Good evening.
So there have been major changes within the AKP since the beginning of November, starting with the shock resignation of Erdoğan's son-in-law, Berat Albayrak, from his position as Minister of Finance. Last week, founding member of the AKP, Bülent Arınç, also presented his resignation from the Presidential High Advisory Board after Erdoğan criticized him for calling for the release of political prisoners Osman Kavala and Selahattin Demirtas. So what is going on in the AKP? How do you evaluate these resignations, Professor?
I mean, as far as I see, of course, there are several changes depending on these resignations and the last events in AKP. So, therefore, it's necessary to evaluate the recent developments in the Justice and Development Party from several points. Of course, there are different reasons behind Berat Albayrak's and Arınç resignations. It is obvious. And let's try to explain first with the resignation of Albayrak. As far as I understand, on the one hand, it's an perception tactically perception, manage perceptions of AKP supporters. It's because we know that there's a decrease of AKP votes depending on economy, and also society, although AKP supporters know that the reason is related with the policies of Berat Albayrak's economy management. Therefore, probably Erdoğan and Albayrak, on the one hand, decided to create such a perception management on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's also possible, probably more powerful idea. We know that the status of Turkish economy and the role of Albayrak's in this economical situation, and maybe Erdoğan is not satisfied with Albayrak's economic management and being so active in the system, not only from the perspective of economy. We know that there is a very huge control mechanisms on the hand of Albayrak, in addition to media and civil society, also Turkish economical powers and business society, so on. Therefore, probably, especially in the last months, there occurs a difference between Erdoğan and its bureaucracy in Beştepe and Albayrak's economy management. So such these serious differences influenced on resignation, as far as I understand. Also, on the other hand, of course, it's very important to focus on the relation of Albayrak with Trump's family, as far as I know. as far as I guess. So Albayrak's relations with the Trump family could have caused some negative influences, could be negative influences in the new period. So Erdoğan may have asked for Albayrak back to strengthen relations with the US institutionally. It may be also important. And what about the resignation of Bülent Arınç? It is completely different, I think, this resignation. We know that especially Arınç's last meeting on TV, Arınç's approach to the detention of the Demirtaş and Kavala is completely different from that of the AKP and People's Alliance. So Arınç not only in the last program, but several times he approached such these democracy and human rights problems before. Arınç criticized the arrest of these two people and judicial system of Turkey. But AKP and the National Alliance think that they are either terrorist criminals or support terrorism. But on the other hand, Arınç's approach to this problem is completely different. Therefore, their views, I mean, Nations Alliance and Bülent Arınç's views on justice and law are very different. And of course, Arınç and Albayrak's resignations was not so effective, didn't create so many influences on society and AKP supporters, and we have witnessed the situation in Turkish media, unfortunately, in this process. Both AKP supporters and AKP's media did not talk about so much about these resignations, but especially Albayrak's resignation. But of course, so many media from AKP part strongly criticized Arınç and his speech. As a result, Arınç and AKP's Nations Alliance approach to democracy, right and justice and understanding of democracy, rights and law is definitely different as far as I see.
Mm-hmm. Professor, thank you so much for summarizing the various factors that might have contributed to both Albayrak and Arınç's resignations, although both resignations from within the AKP still very different when we look at these factors that you summarized. You also mentioned potential cracks within the People's Alliance Party, and I feel like they have been intensified recently following mafia leader Alaaddin Çakıcı's threats to Kılıçdaroğlu and Bahçeli's support for this convicted criminal. Now, the AKP criticized Çakıcı for threatening the main opposition head and said that the legal processes were going to be launched against him. Even Emine Erdoğan had her share of thoughts on the matter. However, both Erdoğan and Bahçeli this week dismissed rumors of cracks within the alliance. Do you believe there's a shift in the balance within the People's Alliance? How is the relationship between Erdoğan and Bahçeli changing in light of recent developments?
Yeah. I don't think that the AKP has a positive view of Çakıcı's treating Kılıçdaroğlu and Bahçeli's defense of this. But as a result, they are the components of an alliance, so they have to support their ideas, even not believe they have to support, but there was nothing they could do but remain silent, especially from AKP's point. As we know, only one official said the judiciary took action after Çakıcı's speech, and he wants to look good on his own base by supporting Bahçeli Çakıcı, as far as I see. And I think that AKP base, AKP voters is disturbed by these statements, because although there's a great similarity in the last years between AKP and National Action Party supporters, I mean, they are basically conservative, and they have deep conservative political values, and under having such deep conservative political values, it's not possible for a person, for a Muslim conservative, to support such this opinion and support such an tweet. And probably, I guess that Erdoğan, behind closed doors, may have reproached Bahçeli, and probably they had a talk about this tweet of Çakıcı, because it is easily understood that such an tweet creates no advantage for both AKP and National Actions Party. And I think especially AKP can suffer from this support, if there occurs a support. Therefore, there is no support. They just remained silent for the continuation of the alliance. That's all. In the final analysis, I don't think that there will be too many problems in the People's Alliance due to this Çakıcı's tweet and this support, because both parties strongly need each other's support in order to stay in power. Although AKP supporters did not strongly support such an approach and tweet, the best methodology is not to talk anymore about this topic.
So in that sense, as you said, the People's Alliance needs to kind of stick together. The AKP and the MHP need to stick together in order to make sure that they stay in power under the rules or the way the new presidential system works. But on their end, the opposition leaders, Kılıçdaroğlu and Akşener, this week, for example, have organized a joint press conference where they called for early elections. They also made statements suggesting that they did not want to alienate voices like Arınç's within the AKP. So they were also somewhat addressing the AKP's voter base as well in that sense. So do you believe that this joint venture on their behalf is a step forward for a more kind of active or courageous stance in politics by the opposition in the time to come?
Yeah. As far as I know, there was a visit for Kılıçdaroğlu to Akşener, and they made strong criticisms about the functioning of the system at the last press conference, and once again they expressed their request for early elections. We know that the components of this alliance, and in addition to other political parties, want an early election in Turkey. But I mean, their express about Turkish democracy, the problems of democracy, human rights problems in Turkey. They share same opinions in different social activities. and meetings. But the problem for Turkish opposition and for Turkish opposition parties is the operation of opposition parties and political forms of politics in Turkey, unfortunately, is not very active. Only active in social media forms, in also party group meetings or voter visits. However, opposition parties should consider and implement more active forms of opposition in Turkey. It's very important, but there is an important problem for Turkish democracy and perception of opposition of Turkish voters. What is it? Turkish political party supporters, even Republican People's Party or National Action Party or AKP support, don't like radical activity in politics. I mean, this is related with the political participation forms of Turkish society and is related with Turkish political culture. I mean, Turkish voter is quite moderate, and they believe that their basic task is voting during elections. That's all. Opposition political parties will talk. They will criticize political party which is in power, but that's all. I mean, they don't like to be so active politics. Turkish voters do not support radical political activism for political parties, for opposition parties in Turkish society. But only speaking during party group meetings or sending tweets from social media is not an so efficient method of making opposition, unfortunately, in Turkey. Therefore, they must try to create new forms of making opposition. However, when the conditions are met, the opposition should even consider leaving the parliament. Unfortunately, this may be the last solution in Turkish politics. Maybe they will not leave the parliament, but they may express the will of leaving the parliament. It may be an inclusive form of making opposition. Otherwise, just talking on Tuesdays during party group meetings is not so effective method of making opposition, I think.
Mm-hmm. So yes, the opposition needs to engage in more active, I guess, opposing activities outside of the kind of traditional and symbolic actions that they undertake. But it seems here also that Erdoğan is also kind of searching for ways to retain his own power, you know, in light of perhaps the call to reforms that he did in the past weeks, even though the sincerity of this call can be questioned, considering that Arınç you know, had to resign, and İhsan Arslan was also sent to the disciplinary board and so forth. So on the one hand, he's calling for reforms, but on the other, you know, I guess he wants to decide what the boundaries of these reforms are. So what do you believe Erdoğan is willing to do in order to retain power? I mean, he has the ability to convince his supporters of whatever he says, you know, no matter how conflicting these statements may be. So in light of perhaps these calls to reforms, what are his options here?
Unfortunately, regarding to the balance of vote shares in the society and parliamentary seats shares in Turkish Grand Assembly gives no exist to Erdoğan for a new gate. I mean, Erdoğan wants to continue his power under all conditions in this system. Unfortunately, it's a matter of also Turkish presidential system. It's a result of Turkish parliament presidential system, because we know that a basic logic operates in the presidential system. Winner takes all. So AKP and Erdoğan never wants to lose his power in this presidential system. Therefore, the only condition for this is National Action Party's support to the AKP and the continuation of the People's Alliance. In my opinion, the AKP base was more receptive to democratization centered reforms in its early years in Turkey, but especially after July 15 coup attempt and the subsequent alliance with the National Actions Party, AKP voters also became strict nationalists. So there is a great similarity, and they close each other in terms of political values. And let me say the results of an last national poll, which was conducted by Metropole, I think. According to the results of this poll, AKP voters support leadership of Bahçeli approximately 70%, and National Action Party voters supported 83 or 84% to Erdoğan. So there is a similarity, and they become closer, not only in terms of, I mean, the votes, but also there's a similarity in terms of political values. Both party supporters becoming more and more nationalists. So they are similar to each other today in terms of political values, exactly. If MHP supports it, Erdoğan will reform to strengthen relations with the US and EU. But what about the approach of National Actions Party to US and EU and more liberal values? Unfortunately, they don't support such this values. Therefore, Erdoğan has no gate or exit gate to empower democracy and relation with EU and US in the form of liberal values, unfortunately. Of course, as we know, they are attempting to make some reforms, but they will just probably in the upcoming period, only simple token regulations can be made in Turkish political system, and these may never be regarded as reforms. If Erdoğan and AKP wants to be ready for reforms, a National Action Party will never give a chance to AKP and Erdoğan, because the legitimacy of a National Actions Party depends on a gap between liberal political values and Turkish democracy, unfortunately.
Professor Tanju Tosun, thank you so much for your interesting insights and your evaluation of the recent developments in Turkish politics.
You're welcome. Thank you.
A Turkish court has sentenced military and civilian personnel to life prison sentences, proclaiming them guilty of involvement in the failed coup attempt of 2016.
A total of 475 defendants, including generals and fighter jet pilots at the Akıncı Air Base on the outskirts of the capital Ankara, were on trial for the past 3 years, accused of directing the coup and bombing key government buildings, including a section of the parliament building. The massive trial was one of 2 main trials against suspected members of a network led by US-based cleric Fethullah Gülen, who denies involvement. Out of these defendants, the 4 ringleaders, dubbed civilian imams, over ties to Gülen's network, were given 79 aggravated life sentences for charges of attempting to assassinate the president, murder, and seeking to overthrow the constitutional order. The Akıncı Air Base, located north of the capital Ankara, is said to have been the coup plotters' command center from which they coordinated attacks, including the fighter jets that attacked the parliament and the presidential complex. The base was also where Chief of General Staff General Hulusi Akar was held hostage. The base has since been renamed Mürted Base.
The German Navy intercepted a Turkish ship in the Mediterranean on Sunday on suspicion it was violating an arms embargo on Libya. The incident has led to a diplomatic spat, with the Turkish Foreign Ministry summoning the envoys to Ankara of Germany, the EU, and Italy to protest the unauthorized operation.
German forces, with the EU's Operation Irini, a mission to stop illicit weapons transfers to Libya, boarded the Turkish-flagged Rosalind A freighter in the Mediterranean about 200 kilometers north of the Libyan city of Benghazi. After a more than 15-hour search, Ankara ordered the operation be halted, preventing German personnel from completing their investigation, according to German officials. Turkey's foreign ministry condemned the search as unlawful. According to the ministry's spokesperson Hami Aksoy, the ship was carrying paint and humanitarian aid to the Libya port of Misrata. Aksoy said the crew was forcibly searched. The intervention in question was carried out with consent from neither our country as the flag state nor the ship's captain, Aksoy said in a statement on Monday. Speaking to reporters in Berlin also on Monday, German Defense Ministry spokesperson Christian Thiaz refuted Aksoy's claims, saying the ship's crew was cooperative and did not object to the search. He said Ankara did not respond within 4 hours of the search notice, which is considered implicit consent by monitors. No evidence was found of weapons aboard the Rosalind A at the time of the search, and the ship eventually continued to its destination. This incident adds another strain to EU-Turkey relations at a time when bilateral ties are in the spotlight ahead of a key European Council summit on December 10, during which member states are expected to review possible sanctions on Ankara.
General Representative for the We Will Stop Femicides platform, Gülsüm Kav, was named among the BBC's 100 Inspiring and Influential Women for 2020. Among the list that ranked women from many different countries, professions, and age groups, Gülsüm Kav was the only woman from Turkey to be included.
The We Will Stop Femicide platform was founded in 2010 as a response to the increasing cases of femicide and sex-based violence. The organization monitors lawsuits, creates resources for women subjected to sex-based violence, and collects database and statistics for women who are murdered by men in Turkey. As the platform's co-founder and general representative, Gülsüm Kav stated the following in her BBC introduction. The women offering resistance today seek equality and freedom. The pandemic, which has shed light on the inequalities that women experience, shows there is no other way than for these women to push for change. Speaking to Mediascope, the social justice activist said that being recognized for her work felt embarrassing because she felt like she was rewarded for fulfilling an obligation. Over the past year, high femicide rates and parliamentary debates over withdrawing from the Istanbul Convention have created widespread criticism in Turkey. As Kav called everyone to stand together in the women's fight for their lives, she said that we will do justice to this award only when all and any kind of femicides and sex-based violence are stopped in Turkey. The day after BBC published the 100 Inspiring and Influential Women's List, November 25, marked the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. The significance of this day is to raise awareness of the global reality that women around the world are subjected to rape, domestic, and other forms of violence. As a part of this conversation, Professor Birgül Demirtaş from Turkish German University and Professor Zuhal Yeşilyurt Gündüz from TED University spoke to Medyascope on pejorative behavior patterns women face by men in the political world.
The field of high politics, where matters like national and international security concerns are covered, tends to be mostly suited to men. There, women fight significantly more to be present. They change the language and jargon that is used, and they add further critical perspectives to topics being discussed. In doing so, women are often exposed to mensplaining, which is a pejorative term that signifies explaining something to a woman in a condescending manner. It is basically saying, you don't really know what we are talking about because you're a woman. We will explain to you what it is.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. See you next Friday at 9 p.m. Good night.